We're here today with Stephen. I'm going to let him do a little bit of his own introduction, but this is our third installment of our Higher Ed Headspace webinar, which we are doing for the first time ever. And the whole point of this time is to just help all of us who are in higher education strategy and leadership transition from one academic year and kind of from that summer headspace, which is just as busy, but it's different, into our new academic year and the start of the fall semester. So we have been hearing from a lot of great experts on the different kind of tactics and approaches and tools that they're using as they go into this new academic year. And today we're going to be hearing from Stephen and talking about measuring what matters. And that's going to touch on a lot of different things. We're going to cover a lot of ground. And so if you don't mind, Stephen, giving us a little bit of an introduction of who you are, how you ended up where you are and why you love what you do, and a little bit about rework, all of that there, that would be fantastic to kind of help us level set and get prepared for what we're going to hear today.
Happy to, yeah. So my name's Stephen Smith. My background in education is in industrial organizational psychology, which if you're not familiar is half understanding how people work and half statistics. We have found that if you don't pair some of these things with data, it just feels like another opinion. I got my first gig doing HR, as you might imagine, in a Fortune 500 here in Iowa, which is why I now live in Iowa of all places, and really understanding how to measure the work that's happening. In that time, saw a lot of great opportunities to continue to improve upon the kind of analytics we were using and to really pair the world of statistical significance with practical significance. And that's what led to Reworc, is building a tool that has all the great data science you would expect, but the practicality needed to actually take action in today's world, which is what we do. So now at Reworc, we have an employee intelligence platform that really helps understand several things, from experience to culture to honestly to high performing activities and collaboration patterns. It's not just about attitudinal, but it's also about behavioral information. And that totality is what allows us to help improve the businesses that we work with. So 10,000 foot view, that's kind of me, my background, and a little bit more on Reworc.
Wonderful. And you are talking about the platform that you have, and I think we'll end up hearing about that a good bit as we go through some of the questions that I have prepared for you today. But I wanted to ask, since we are here to talk about higher education, do you have any examples of how you have brought this employee intelligence platform to higher education as an industry?
Yeah, on two fronts. One, and certainly in terms of kind of operational, how do we make a better university? How do we make a better experience, better culture for both our staff and our students? Mm-hmm. And then on the other half, helping universities to understand what does the future of our spaces look like as the world is becoming more diverse and dispersed, and our workforce and our students' population look very different preferences. Our approach to real estate and building the spaces around our staff and students are just as important and haven't really been evolving with the times as much. So yes is the answer on two fronts, both in terms of space as well in terms of organizational offerings.
Wonderful. Okay. When you and I were talking prior to this, you really did kind of lead with that tagline of measuring what matters. You've already mentioned kind of practical and statistical significance, but is there anything that you can tell us more? How do we know what matters? Mm-hmm. Right? What have you learned in your own journey about how to measure those specific things? What are the important components that let you have confidence in the results that you get?
If you think about traditional statistics, especially like the engagement survey, right? The seemingly SAT, like going down the bubble charts and filling in your 3s and your 2s all the way. It's really easy to measure which people score lower on certain items than others, right? That's a very easy statistical measurement. Practically, though, in terms of the way we ask questions, we're asking people to weigh in on things that they might not care about. So on the back end, we will see an item that has maybe low satisfaction and say, oh my gosh, look how low that is. Let's go pour all our focus and our energy and our time and our resources around that item. In reality, nobody cared about it. Yeah, it's low ranking, but it doesn't matter. And that is literally the tail wagging the dog. And honestly, most statistical significant, especially attitudinal feedback scores and tests and surveys, fall victim to that same problem. So let me take it back to, I'm not a parent, thank God, but as a 36-year-old boy, even my wife has to give me things in trade-offs. Stephen, you can do this, but if you do this, it's at the expense of this. Which one do you want more? And by creating some kind of prioritization, now by making me, decide which one I care about more, now we can focus on the things that are going to have the largest impact to me because I've created a trade-off. And on the back end, when you roll out that decision, change management is kind of already halfway met because you can point at this around and say, hey, no, you told me this mattered most, which is why I'm focusing my attention on it. And that's how we start to have a more practical approach to understanding what actually matters versus what's the noise, because nobody has time to honestly sink a bunch of time and money into things that aren't going to make a difference.
Yeah. Well, and I know, so I've had the great pleasure, honestly, of working with the Reworc platform. Yeah. Well, not just with the people they are great, but also the tool is. And one of the things that I always say, as a methodologist myself, typically taking a very human-centered approach to my research and almost always going in with a sequential mixed methods kind of approach, right? I tend, depending on the problem, like if we know a lot about the problem, we can just jump into some of these quantitative tools, closed items, right? But typically I'm looking at problems when I'm working with human context issues at things that we have to discover first. And so typically I'll go in and I'll want to use qualitative methodologies to talk to people, to start to see the themes, and then turn those themes into something that we can take instead of to 15 people to 150 or to 1,500 people, right? So that we can then have a closed item that has, you're talking about the bubbles or whatever it may be. So we can go and we can hear, okay, these themes that we heard here, how do they stand up when you take it to more of a generalizable population or sample, right? I say that to say that I have always been, as a consumer in leadership, I've always been skeptical when all I'm given is quantitative insights, right? So when I'm leading an organization, especially when I've been leading teams that are talking about human problems, what is it that our clients want next? Or what is it that the market is asking for right now? I've always been a little bit skeptical when there hasn't been that qualitative piece. Now, fast forward to a time where I'm over here, I'm consulting, I'm working with institutions. And this actually happened to me working with an institution of higher education using Reworc for the first time in my life, right? We were using the Reworc platform we were canvassing all students, faculty, staff as well with some similar questions. And I want to talk about that in a second. I want to talk about kind of the modules that you have. We're going to get there. But we used that. And at the same time, we were doing a listening tour. So Reworc, we implemented it. We had results from the platform within 3 weeks. And that was including the time it took to do things like setting up the audience file and all of that, which I want us to go into. But that was from kind of inception to here's a 3-pager about the results, right? I'm over here doing this qualitative input or analysis that requires talking to people. I spent about 60 hours talking to people, analyzing, doing all these things, had some really cool insights that I was excited about and thought, man, there's no way they got any sort of insight into this particular facet of the student experience through the survey tool is what I oversimplified it to be, right? Lo and behold, I get together with my team that have been running Reworc, and they're like, we had this really cool insight come up about what students are looking for on campus and what's really valuable to them. And I'm like, oh yeah, tell me about it. It was exactly what I had found doing these 60 plus hours of interviews, which still brought great, robust richness to what we were doing. But what impressed me about it was the ability that the Reworc platform had, right, to surface these deeply human needs and insights, and not just to say, hey, this is a blip on the radar, but to show here's the magnitude with which it matters. And here's where, so it's super important to students and their experience, for example, and this is where they're feeling right now. And you can also take that and you can look and see who's feeling that this need that's very important is most met, who's feeling like it's not met. What can we infer from that? Everything I had been able to infer was just amplified by what the Reworc platform was able to give in a much not just shorter window and not just about the effort being put in. Of course, those are important, but it gave results that were valid very quickly and with a high level of confidence because we heard from something like 487 students out of a student body of about 2,000, which is actually pretty good, right? It's a really good response rate. So I became a convert at that point and, really said, man, this is a very powerful tool to understand the things you pointed out. And I've seen it hold true when it comes to, like you said, space, right? How are we using space? If we are redoing our, the School of Ed, and we're getting ready to do a big remodel, like how can we understand who needs to be where? I'd love to hear more from you on that, right? And that kind of comes into where we'll talk about the different applications and modules that you guys have available. But to bring it back and to make it kind of something I want to hand off to you, one of the things that I realized, two things were incredibly important to Rework's power. And one is the modules that you guys have that you can deploy. You have some great frameworks that are highly researched that you were able to make available to, an institution should they want to use it. So I'd love to hear a little bit about those, right? You have like the competing values, you have some for the space piece. Love to hear about it. And then also the way that you create psychological safety. I think both were very powerful in getting meaningful, but then also authentic results from the population. So could you tell us a little bit about your modules and how those are developed and how you're always looking for new ones?
Yeah, and maybe I'll answer the second question first because it's a little bit more philosophical as that baseline. And then maybe I can even switch over. And do we do graphics? Can I show you a little bit of the thing so it can...
You can show us all the things. Okay. I would love that.
Methodologically, that word always gets me. Philosophically, we talked about trade-offs and prioritization. Again, if we just ask for wish lists, usually leaders kind of glaze over when you bring them an engagement survey anymore because it feels like a wish list or a happiness survey. It doesn't tie to business. It doesn't have anything. Prioritization is the first step. The second step is measuring the holistic nature of work. If we're only talking about, are you very satisfied or unsatisfied with these constructs, that's not getting deep enough. I need to know about time on task. Where are we spending our labor? Who are we working with? What are the bottlenecks? Like all the questions we always get, we can now use data to actually help uncover the totality of work versus just chasing an engagement tail, which is hard. Number three, I think these things have to be future forecasted. I think, all these analytics that we get are lagging indicators, especially coming out of the development world, HR world, largely speaking, they're lagging indicators. We need to build, future scenario predictive models so that we can say, and as our, workforce, as our student population continues to become more, diverse and dispersed, with all things being left unsaid, here's how that's going to keep going. And now that I can see into the future, maybe it helps us get action on it better. And then, that psychological safety part was huge, right? Do you feel like you have a good boss on a scale of 1 to 5? I don't know. Is my answer going to be visible to my boss? And if so, 5. Best boss I ever had, right? Like, what are we doing here, y'all? We're checking boxes. So instead of and there's a couple ways to get around psychological safety. One is not asking direct questions that people feel like will be used against them later in court, right? I don't need to sign my own death certificate. And number two is making sure that we are hopefully gathering some of the demographic data on the back end. You mentioned an audience file earlier. The second you ask people who they are, what department they sit in, they will start lying to you. It is just that simple. Once you start, calling people out, that's when answers get a little bit wonky and bias comes in and all of those things. So being able to measure something clean, attach it cleanly on the back end is another way in which we are able to just focus on the work that's happening. And from that, we can deduce policy, procedure, place implementations, etc. philosophically. Now, how does that translate to those models you were just asking me about? I can pop open my screen real quick to show you a little bit more of what that looks like. So if you can see my screen right now, I'm going to pull up a few different things. The first really starts with the work. We'll get to satisfaction and those things later, but literally, how are my people spending their time? So in this organization, it looks like this is a large speaker organization that most of us have in our rooms or our houses from California, 330 person operational and sales part of their business. And I want to understand how they're working. So literally what are you spending your time doing? So each of these bubbles you're seeing represents a unique activity that's happening within any organization. Doesn't matter if you are healthcare, doesn't matter if you are a law shop, doesn't matter if you are higher education. You are spending your time researching or in meetings. Now, what you're researching might be different. The content of those meetings might be different, but the fundamental core activities are all the same. And then where these bubbles fall on this grid are completely dependent upon the answers that we got from clients. So again, left to right means that this activity might be very hard, complex, novel, new, require expert judgment. If on my left side, maybe it's a little bit more transactional of work. Maybe it's a little bit more procedural. My y-axis is collaboration. I mean, does it often take a bunch of people to get this kind of activity done in my organization? Or is it more of an isolated activity? And that's going to be really helpful because as you start comparing against tenured versus non-tenured, as you compare staff to, back of house, as you compare one department versus another, you'll quickly see that we don't all work the same way. And that should be pretty obvious, but that's not how our plans are made today. It's kind of based on the average, and average doesn't seem to work for anyone. So understanding those differences are important. But as I mentioned with this module specifically, tying things back to the business. If this feels like a happiness survey, most leaders will glaze over. We also ask employees, how valuable is the time spent doing this work when it comes to supporting success in your role? So the darker the blue or the higher up on this chart, these are employees telling me, yeah, this really aligns with me getting a gold star at the end of the year. And forced ranking style, grays, yellows, and browns, these are activities that aren't adding as much value, maybe even standing in the way of some of that highly valuable time, right? So now I can go to a leader and talk about, listen, you're spending about, 18% of your total labor, more than any other activity in your organization is formal meeting. And y'all rate it, pretty dang near bottom of the barrel. Of course, if I look at managers, that gets even more dramatic, right? Your managers are 25% of the time bottom of the barrel. And that comes out to about 1,800-ish man hours, labor hours a week. Take that times 52 weeks a year, 2,000 hours a week, all that jazz. You're spending about $10 million a year in formal meeting. And nobody's finding value. Matter of factly, those aren't brainstorming sessions. Those aren't decision-making sessions. Those are just regular status check-in updates, essentially legacy waste. So when I'm thinking about creating a holistic plan for how do I better a workforce, yes, are you happy with things? Certainly matter. And we'll get to that. But how much of your time is being spent on the things that actually bring you success? Because if you're not having a good ratio of this is what leads to burnout. This is what leads to people taking work home. This is what leads to the lagging indicators of satisfaction with these elements. And now we have a way to quantify it for our leadership so they can actually see the impact versus just feeling like some big kind of hard thing to describe or define, if that makes sense. But I'm talking a lot, again, as usual, for the first module. Any thoughts or questions that this brings up with you when you look kind of at activities?
Well, I wanted to also just mention to those in attendance that I have turned on your ability to speak up, ask questions. So we do welcome those at any time. And also, welcome if you have specific questions you'd like us to veer towards as we go through, we can always do that. I really like it, and you've touched on it, but I like to point it out again. On the right-hand side, this activity rank, everybody consumes these visuals differently. I really find a lot of value in these rankings that the platform provides. And so being able to understand, how do these things come to the top, right? So the questionnaire is put together, the survey is put together. And then, my understanding is limited, even just working just on it with this side, right, Stephen? So you can correct me if and where I'm wrong. But to be able to see that, for example, with this question here, like certain things have come to the top. And you could see, for example, down there, we have the colors saying like what's most important, what's more important, but then also being able to see here. And so in this particular one, what are the percentages showing us? So I'm able to see the rank and then these percentages. Can you just kind of walk us through this particular one, what it's showing, so we get a better grasp of that sort of visualization that you can expect?
Yeah. So if you were to add up all of these bars, it would come up to 100%. And that 100% means all of the hours in which my people are spending doing work for my organization. So in this organization of 330 people in this department of this organization, 9% of their time is spent planning, and it's very, very important for their success of their roles. Conversely, this organization of 330 people are spending about 17% of their time in formal meetings. So dang near a day a week is spent in formal meetings. And based on the color and how low on this chart it is, this is people telling me that we're doing a lot of it, but it's not adding value to our organization. Ultimately, if I'm a leader, I want to think about the ratio. How much of my people's time is being spent in the important stuff as compared to the whole? And if it's only 25% of my time is being spent on high value activities, we're probably missing the mark, and we could be more thoughtful with making sure that we have time on task.
Wonderful. No, that's really good. Now, any attendees, I want to, again, just open up the floor if you have any sort of questions. This is really, really nice. Could you show us maybe some of the culture ones that you have? I think it would be great. I really like looking at the context and culture piece there. If that's where you're thinking of going next, I think that'd be great.
Absolutely. I think, they say culture eats strategy for breakfast, but we don't usually measure culture. We usually measure engagement. Like, do you like desk? Do you like boss? Do you like money? All of those things are important, but that's different than the underlying cultural norms and beliefs, right? So we measure both those for good reason. And like everything else, it is all about trade-offs. We cannot be everything to everybody. We cannot please everybody. We need to know who we are and do that really well. So this is why we've used the Cameron and Quinn's competing value framework, because again, not only is it trade-off between where are we and where are we going, which is extremely valuable, but it also is very visual. You get these surveys back and seeing ones that say, your company's culture is a 3.1 and we're shooting for a 3.2 next year. What the hell does that mean? What does a 3.1 look like in terms of a culture? And how do we get 0.1 more? What does that culture feel like? These are things that do not aspire. These are things that do not motivate. These are things that do not have any practical significance. And that's why we've chosen to work with this model, which is, I think, still to this day, probably the most validated cultural model that's out there. But I'll explain it real quick because I think it's super important in terms of creating alignment within the organization and to make sure that we're all kind of seeing the same checkered finish line. So what we do is we give everyone in an organization, and as you mentioned, we've done this with students and staff. It's fascinating to see what students and staff think of the same exact place culturally, but we give all of them 100 points. And we say, all right, take these 100 points and distribute them amongst these four corners based on how the culture feels today. Bottom right means that, our culture is very competitive. On the good side, these organizations can feel like, high performing teams. On the bad side, these can be teams that, are internally competitive and eat each other. Or are we top right corner? Are we very innovative? Yeah, we're still trying to win, but we're doing it by creating, tomorrow's solutions today. The good side of these organizations is, hey, man, we're curing cancer here. On the bad side, maybe we're not as focused as we need to be. Or if I move to the left corner, now we're talking about the collaborate quadrant, mission, vision, value. These are organizations that you will find the logo on the walls in the lobby as soon as you enter. The good side are these are teams that together we can. On the bad side, these can be organizations that maybe, have death by democracy and get gridlocked. Finally, in the bottom left-hand corner, it's more about command and control. These are organizations that do not make fatal flaws on the plus side. But on the bad side, perhaps they're not going anywhere quickly and they'll get passed by the competition. Again, these are competing values. So they take 100 points in this organization. They told me they are primarily externally competitive. And the thing that probably defines them the least is their ability to innovate. For a retail organization, this is something that they need to look at. But then we give all of those same employees from executive down to, individual contributor or students. And we say, here's another 100 points. Now distribute those again based on what the ideal future looks like. In 5 years, if this school, if this team, if this department were to be everything we hoped it could be, what would that look like? And that's where we get the blue. And why this is, again, valuable, because now I have a very clear visual to say, where are we and where are we going? And honestly, you don't need a whole lot of help understanding, what would more of this look like? Now, yes, that's helpful in terms of culture and communicating and visualizing and motivating, but it's also in terms of change management. I want to understand, is everybody seeing the same thing? Do my, individual contributors, are they going the same direction as my midline managers? And are they going the same direction as our VPs or our executives? What about our departments? Are we all pretty much singing Kumbaya and pulling the same direction, except for we might have an outlier? Either way, at the end of the day, culturally, I know that those things will change by leader, by location and things like that. But we do want to make sure that we're rowing the same direction. And if not, that is how we can now identify the areas that actually need our intervention rather than bludgeoning everybody over the head with the same change management plan. And that's how we start to look at culture and how that could help both in terms of what students are looking for, as well as, of course, the staff that is providing the knowledge and education to those students. Any thoughts or questions on that, Miss Marion Beth, as we go through it?
No, this is really great. Wonderful. And so, if we see this sort of thing, and you've mentioned some of this, but if you get these sorts of results back, how do you decide what sort of actions to take to move the needle?
Well, outside of having, action libraries and materials to do so, just intuitively, if we know, for example, that our organization is trying to lose a little bit of the stability and control, our hands are very tight on the wheel, But we want to have a more innovative culture. What does that look like? Well, the beautiful thing is this is not mapping to a thing, but it's our North Star statement for every decision we make moving forward. If there's a policy decision, we now need to say, does this support our goal of being more innovative? Or does this keep us, back into our safe controlling selves? So while there are many, many applications, depending on department and all of those things and people, the idea that it is your North Star check-in point for the decisions that are much more valuable as you go throughout your strategic planning efforts. I do realize that we're getting close to the end of time, Mary Beth. So I'm wondering, there's a couple things I'd love to show y'all. We talked about, engagement, and we do it a little bit differently, of course, network and how do people actually interacting with one another? And is that good? I mean, we talk about collaboration all the time, but we've got to be honest with ourselves. A lot of collaboration is not good collaboration, right? Matter of fact, a lot of it sucks a bunch of time out of our lives and energy. So being able to look at that's also very important. But, another thing that's really, becoming very critical for us in our conversations, especially with both business and being that in between business and education, is the skill sets of the future. If we have maybe just a quick moment, can I run through that, you think?
Yes, I would love that. I went to unmute and I clicked my video off. Yes, please
Awesome.
do. Because this is one that I love
So,
and one that it took me a bit to really understand, right? But when I did, it was really valuable.
the network or the skills?
Well, just kind of like how to see, like how to interpret it and then what to do with it, right? And it's just been so impactful, not just for Baton itself, but also for working with different clients. So
Love it. Okay, yeah. So the world is trying to figure out the future of work and the skills required to do so. There's several organizations, McKinsey, World Economic Forum, that will look at that by sending out assessments to CEOs to say, hey, CEO, which skills do you think will be most important for your organization overall in the next, 5-10 years? And you'll start to see, this is a version that we can, of course, attach to the podcast from the World Economic Forum. And we can see how, CEOs say which skills are most important by the different industries. We've taken that methodology and we've taken it even further, because now we've taken that methodology and sent it to the entire organization and said, organization, it's great to know what CEO thinks about the totality of their business, but man, IT department is probably very different than HR department, which is probably very different than my sales department, right? So how do we get that more granular? So we throw this same list of skills to everybody in the organization and say, hey, all these skills are going to be super important in the future, but pick the 5 that you think will be most important to your role or roles like yours, if they exist, in the next 3 to 7 years. And then once you tell me that, I then want you to tell me how prepared or unprepared you believe our organization is. So you are seeing skills on the left in order of the importance or the number of people that said that item was going to be critical. So in this organization, and we have different studies that I have popped up just in case we want to look at different ones, but in this organization of 350 people, more people said that mental resiliency and agility was going to be critical for the success of their role than any other skill, more than coding, more than analytical frameworks, more than operations, or in this case, even customer service and innovation, which is, big for retail. Mental resiliency and agility. Number 2, leadership and social influence. Number 3, there's that creativity and innovation. And levels of preparedness, okay. Now, if I start to break that down by levels of leadership, you will also see those stories change. And that's super valuable for us, because for individual contributors, maybe they'll think that the most important thing is dependability, and they're really good at it. That makes sense, right? On time, make sure your shoes are tied, your shirt's tucked in, and we're good at that. But as I start going to my managers, you can see M3 on my screen if you're following through, now is where some of these skills like resiliency, mentoring, innovation, empathetic listening start to pop up. And the levels of preparedness are much less so. So if we're looking at the top of our house, our M6s, I guess, in this organization, you can kind of see how prepared or unprepared we are with the things that they're identifying as being critical to company success. This now starts to ask different questions. Most importantly, though, in my belief, is you're seeing a lot of the human skills rise to the top, right? We're seeing that as time is passing, robots are starting to do robot work a lot better than people can, which means that the onus is going to start coming back to the human work, not the robot work. We will, of course, need coders. We will, of course, need people with these skill sets. But the larger aspect of what we need to be teaching our future workforce, as CEOs are telling us, are around those human skills. So As we look back to our partners in upper education, especially in my state, you're seeing, a lot of removal of philosophy and psychology. You're seeing, not as much critical thinking skills as you are rote memory skills. And what our executives are saying is, you're not hitting the mark for us. We need this, and we are not getting it from you. So as we work with our upper education partners to say, okay, so then how do we develop the skill sets? Because as you mentioned, when we did this with the students, it's very clear, even if we agree to, maybe school's too expensive, number one though is I will go through whatever to make sure I get a job. And CEOs are telling us, to get a job, I need you to have these things. And I don't think you do. There's a gap there. And I believe that we can help fill that gap in terms of having a more synergistic approach to developing, our next generation workforce to have the skills that we actually need them to have based on what we know today, not based on what we knew before AI came around. So that's how we start to think about skill sets and the things that are driving some of the decisions in our organizations. And it's going to help us, again, focus our time and energy on the things that are going to have the largest impact to our businesses and to our people.
Great. Now, can you go back to the network piece and show a little bit about that? Because I really, really do find it incredibly helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at a network analysis, it's to understand, how do people collaborate? So if you can see my screen, the lines will show you how. Is it virtual, or, I don't care if you're in the same office or you're still just Microsoft Teamsing back and forth. The thickness of these lines between these departments will show you the volume. Obviously, a bigger line, thicker line, the more volume that's going between those two. As I highlight my mouse over the teams, the colors and my legend starts to change, and that shows you directionality. And that's key now, because if I have one department that's constantly getting bombarded by everybody, that could either be a powerhouse or a silo or a bottleneck. I might need to resource that differently. So being able to understand how information actually flows in the direction is going to tell us more than traditional, network analyses might. And then ultimately, again, kind of like that behaviors, if you remember, so what? Yeah, you're collaborating a bunch and all this stuff and more here and less there. I'm going to zoom in so you can see this. But so what? Because honestly, not all collaboration is created equal. Matter of factly, a lot of collaboration is honestly unproductive. So we will indicate that by the translucency of a line. Regardless if it's thick or thin, the darker a line, the more value those two teams say they have working with one another. The more translucent, the less. Big, low-hanging, easy fruit for an organization is find what are the big chunks of time that people are spending collaborating with one another that aren't being productive. Honestly, 9 times out of 10, it's legacy waste. We're doing the same thing and we could have done it better a different way. In this example, I'm looking at the leadership team. And as I highlight my mouse over them, you can see, they're working with all of these teams, primarily with this, this product team down here and a couple here on the right. But as I highlight my mouse over them, you can see that biggest, thickest line is very translucent, which tells us that leadership and marketing product team has a grind. I actually know this client. This is a real client that we've anonymized. Marketing product team is a black box. And every time somebody needs something from them, it's 3 emails, 2 phone calls, and I got to elevate to understand what the heck's going on. Why do we not have an online self-service portal? Why do we not have some sort of queue where I can see what's going on? That's a very real, easy process improvement thing we can now identify and implement. And at the end of the day, our efforts are, how do I help my team spend their time where it's most valuable? And if it's bumping into old processes that are making them work twice as long for half the value, those are things that for me as a business, I want to identify and improve upon for the betterment of, individuals and the collective.
Yeah. So see, I really like that. And again, I've tried to highlight through this that there's a learning curve, right, to implementing a platform like this as an institutional leader, right? And you've done a great job of showing us, hey, this is what this signifies. This is what this shows. This is how this is working. But, when you're in a position where you're a decision maker or you're a leader, you really want the insights, right? It's great to know, how it works and all of that. But that, to be quite honest, and is where Baton Global often comes in with our clients, is we are versed in this tool. And like I said, I've highlighted my own learning journey with it to say, I had to learn really how to read these things and unlock the value that's in them. If it's the kind of thing that I look at these weekly, right? Depending on clients I'm working with, you look at them daily because it's your daily bread. And then, a strategic steering committee or a dean or an EVP at a, provost at a university might be looking at these once a year, right? Or quarterly, depending on how frequently they say, hey, I want to measure what matters at my institution or in my department or in my area of the world, right? And so that is quite honestly where our team comes in, where we say, hey, let's help you do this because there's some work that goes into it, just some good elbow grease in terms of working with the right people on your team, in your universe, to get the audience file, for example, and make sure that it's in a format that's going to work so that when you have respondents coming to it, those respondents are not having to answer questions like, are you a commuter student or a residential student? What is your ethnicity? What year are you? Universities have all of that information already. So why would we be asking for it again? Let's only ask those questions that we don't have the answers to that we need. And so that's the kind of thing that we help make sure happens. We interface with the right people in your team. And then honestly, as a leader, you're not going to sit back because you're going to be very busy doing other things, but not this. We come back to you later and we say, hey, we want to walk you through this. We want to show you your results. We want to explain these charts and these tables and the networks and all of that. But what we really have for you today that's going to give you bang for your buck is a 2 to 3 page overview of what are the top 10 takeaways here for your piece of the universe. And here we want to talk through those with you. And we can go back to the platform and we can go back to the data and show you exactly how we came to this suggestion or this conclusion. But we want to get you as quickly as possible from question to answer so that you can use that answer to drive action, because that's what your role is to be the action taker and the action decider. Right. And so it has been such a pleasure to work with this tool because, again, not to harp on my own methodological holdups, but to say, we could spend months talking to people, putting together different custom surveys. But honestly, we need to move quickly. And the Reworc team has done such a great job of pulling together those different frameworks and things that are known about human psychology and humans at work and humans at learning, and put it into this tool that we can actually go from question to answer in about 3 weeks. And that answer turns into action. That depends largely on the institution and the leader, but we have you primed for action in under a month. And so I think it's a great time to be talking about this as we go into the school year, because a lot of those questions are popping up. And we're saying, how are our students feeling? What are there any rubs for our faculty and our staff? We know there are. We know no one has to tell us yet again, kind of the state of higher education, which the discourse around that for the past few years has been a little more doom and gloom than I like, right? I'm a very positive person, but I do see us shifting in that and realizing that adult learning is not going anywhere. Adults may look different, but in this world of ever-changing work and where things evolve so rapidly, higher education has a new role to fill. And so tools like this, whether it's talking about skills of the future, which you guys also help us empower, where we work with universities or we work with chambers of commerce or municipalities to figure out, we have these skills. We know that they're coming up. What's actually needed by your particular constituency, whether it's the people that live in your region or the students who are coming to your institution. We can learn about the skills that they need and want, and which they feel they're being equipped with or not. We can hear from students, faculty, staff about, faculty and staff, we can hear about their work life at the institution. Where are the rubs? Where's the friction? Where are the things that are going great that we can learn from? How can we stave off burnout? How can we keep people engaged in this meaningful work? And then from the student perspective, the Reworc platform allows us to understand the climate that they're experiencing from the cultural perspective, right? What matters to them, but also it allows us to hear from them, what's the value proposition that your particular institution provides to them? Right. And I've seen that firsthand with institutions where it's finding out, wow, certain things matter to our students a lot more than we thought, or there's a big difference potentially between the value proposition we need to provide to our part-time commuter students and the value proposition we need to provide to our full-time residential students. And we can actually understand that through this tool. And then we can find the ways to meet that. We can take that action very quickly to make sure that we're delivering and that students are not only learning, but that they're satisfied while they're learning as well. So I just want to point out there is so much potential for application here. In follow up to this call today, this webinar, we are going to be reaching out to everyone who came, who was able to attend, those who, RSVP'd as well, to say, hey, we want to do like an initial read through with you and a leadership team. My dog has decided he wants to join the meeting. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but he's gotten a little vocal. So I'm going to let you say a few parting words, Stephen, and then we will wrap up.
Simply that, we have tried our best to become an organizational MRI. There are a lot of things that are going on, but we have to be agnostic of that. We will tell you what's going on. It's great to partner with specialists and surgeons like Baton Global, with you, Mary Beth in particular, to put ourselves on treatment plans. And that's what we're all trying to do, whether it's a trainer, whether it's a doctor, what have you. And yeah, I think if anyone's interested in kind of the methodology and how to get deeper into your analytics while making it more painless for your people, happy to discuss further, happy to let you play around the tool. I think we're just trying to make work. So thanks for the time and the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. With that, we are adjourned. Take care. Thank you, Stephen. Bye, everyone.